Thank you very much. It's good to be here again. I think we're due to finish at 1, is that right, for lunch? So what I will do, because I do want to leave time for some discussion, is I'm going to go through the 150 slides at 1 a second, and then we'll have some discussion. I just want to introduce you, because many of you won't be familiar with this approach, to the concept, and then if at lunchtime or this afternoon, or for some of you who are here tomorrow, we can discuss it further. I guess what's really interesting is that all of us come to our professional theorizing from our own experiences, and our own professional experiences, and our own personal experiences. Most of my working life has been involved. I've been involved in addiction and addictive behaviours, and I think that has conditioned some of the thoughts and concepts that have led to this theory. And one of the ways in which it's done it is to recognise that in addictive behaviours, just like other behaviours, you experience something very interesting, which is the momentary nature of the behaviour. To give you an example at a sort of very microcosmic level, when someone is engaged in using cocaine, crack cocaine, for example, or sniffing cocaine, you see a particular dynamic to the session, the way that it works, in which the person will start, and it turns into a binge. And very often the binge only finishes when the cocaine runs out. And understanding that process, I think, it can be very helpful in understanding the broader motivational processes that are going on with addictive behaviours, but also with other behaviours. Because what you observe in that process, and some of you may have personal experience of this, although I doubt it, this being a very upstanding university and audience, is that you start the process and you experience a high degree of euphoria. As the process goes on, the euphoria becomes less, but the urge becomes more. You get this dissociation between the wanting, the feeling of anticipated pleasure that you're going to get, and the urge to do it. So this is a very well-known phenomenon in stimulant use generally, but it's very, very strong in the case of cocaine. What this does is to focus our attention on the moment-to-moment control of behavior, but also the recognition that when we're thinking about behavior as a whole, we have to take into consideration the high-level human processes that we've been hearing about, the cognitions, the thoughts, identity, but we also have to pay very close attention to the very low-level animalistic urges, habits, and instinctive behaviors that lie underlie it. And that's what's really conditioned the theory that I'm going to talk about. We talk about motivation, and that's a major focus in the area of health behavior, because a lot of the behaviors that we're talking about are ones where we can take other things for granted. But in many behaviors, that's not the case. And it's also not the case for a lot of health behaviors. Motivation is just one factor that enables a behavior to occur. The other two key ones are capability. Are you able to engage in the behavior? And opportunity. And we heard a little bit earlier about the importance of the environment, about the context. And these act as a system. And if we want someone to be able to do something or to engage in a particular activity, we have to pay attention to all of those factors to make sure that they're all in place, because if one of those is missing, the behavior won't happen. It's no good being motivated to go for a run or to engage in some sporting activity if the opportunity is not there, or if you don't have the capability to do it. So, although I'm just focusing on motivation, I want to make it very clear that it's just one part of an interacting system. So the prime theory of motivation is a perspective, and it's actually it's a satellite view of motivation. It's an attempt to look at the processes that are involved in motivation from a distance, so that we can see how the different parts of the motivational system function together. a lot of the motivational theories that we're interested in are ones that deal with a particular part of motivation, about self-awareness, self-control. But as I mentioned earlier, we also need to take into consideration those processes that are very animalistic and very basic. And what prime theory tries to do is to see how these things can relate to each other. So it's not a substitute for those theories. It's a way of integrating those theories so that we can see when and where a particular theory might be most relevant in our work. And the acronym comes from a sense in which that integration can be thought of with 5 components, 5 structures to within the motivational system. A system that forms plans or intentions, which we've heard about. A system at the very lowest level, which organizes our responses. A system which generates the impulses, the low-level impulses and the inhibitions, which guide the moment-to-moment control of our behavior. A system which generates what I call motives. These are wants and needs. I'll talk about those quite a lot, actually, because I think these are at the very heart of self-conscious human motivation. And then a system which drives evaluations, beliefs. So I won't have time, obviously, to go into detail on these, but I just want you to get a sense that this diagram actually gives a sense of how these things relate to each other. So right at the heart, you have responses, but these are not controlled by our intentions. Our responses are not controlled by our intentions. They're controlled by impulses and inhibitions acting at the moment-to-moment level. These are then controlled by environmental factors and our desires, our wants and needs. These are controlled by environmental factors and by our evaluations, our beliefs about what's good and bad. And then these are controlled by environmental factors and by our plans. So the plans, which come at the beginning, they give structure to our behavior, and these are our intentions, our rules, the things that we decide we're going to do. But a fundamental precept within the theory is that the intention or plan behavior gap is not a particularly surprising phenomenon, because plans are about as far away from behavior as it's possible to get in the human brain. Because in order for a plan to be implemented, you've got to formulate it, you've got to remember it, it's got to then still seem like a good idea, so it's still got to be thought of as a good plan, it's got to generate the desire to behave in a particular way, you've still got to want or need to do it, it's then got to find its way to create the impulse or the inhibition, and all the way through that process, it's coming into competition with other things, other plans, other goals, other things coming from your immediate environment. And so it's got to fight its way through. So the mystery in human behavior is that we ever do anything we intend to do. And I mentioned earlier that our own experiences often condition the kind of theories we come up with. And as Susan will testify, in case you didn't know, Susan and I are married, so Susan will testify, this is a theory of my behavior in the sense that I'm very easily diverted from my plans. But actually, maybe I'm extreme case, but I think we all are in the sense that our immediate environment is having a big role. So this is another way of representing what I was talking about. We have our responses. These are generated by competing impulses and inhibitions. These are generated by habits and instincts, low-level mechanisms, but also by higher-level affective goals. These are desires. These are our needs and wants. These are also influenced by our beliefs about what's good and bad, what's right and wrong, and these are influenced by things as well as including plans. So that's the structure of the system. Another way of looking at it, this is the same concept, but just expressed in a different way. You've got responses on the right, influenced by impulses and inhibitions, but also directly by our external environment. So the external environment and our internal environment is bearing down on and influencing every part of this process. And right at the other end there is our plans. Our plans, these are our self-conscious, under this model, our self-conscious intentions to act or not act in a particular way. And I won't go into the details, all these slides are available, but an example is, I'm going to get up at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, or I've decided I'm not going to smoke anymore, or I'm going to exercise 3 times a week. There's a certain kind of plan, which are our personal rules I mentioned in relation to identity. These are things you do and do not do, and they can be formulated in many different ways. Then in the system, we have our evaluations, what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. And some of these will be very specific, and some of these will be general. And when we're talking about general motivations, that's where we're talking about values. Things like selfishness is bad, it's a bad thing. But the crucial point I want to make to you is that it doesn't matter what you think is good or bad, or right or wrong, or beneficial or harmful, if it doesn't make you want or need to do a particular behavior. We did a study, it's a very simple study, and it's a very obvious study, but we looked at, if you ask smokers, do you want to stop smoking? 70% of smokers will say, yes, I want to stop smoking. If you ask the smokers in a different way, you say, you can endorse one or more of these statements, or none of them if you like. I want to stop smoking, I ought to stop smoking. 30% of smokers will say, I want to stop smoking. In England, 40% will say, I ought to stop smoking. When you then follow these people up 6 months later, you can guess who it is who's made a quit attempt. It's those who want to stop smoking, and those who ought to stop smoking, there's no association. So it's not enough to think something's a good idea if it doesn't make you want to do it. And a crucial part of self-control is generating... It's okay to stop for lunch at 4:30 this afternoon. Okay. Right. A crucial part of self-control is generating the oughts, what I should do, in such a way as to make it so that I want to. And I think this ties in with, if I may say so, with self-determination theory and intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. We also have imperatives. These are the oughts and the wants. These are values specifically relating to actions. What about motives? For me, in human motivation, these lie at the heart of our conscious activities. These are feelings of desire, and where they arise from is our imagined futures. So if I think about coming to Lisbon, I don't just ought to come to Lisbon, I want to come to Lisbon. And the reason is because I've got plenty of good experiences of Lisbon, particularly the restaurants and the food. And so I construct an imagined future of me sitting in one of these lovely restaurants eating the food, and I want to come. It's an anticipated pleasure. But we also have things which work on the other side, which I'm going to call need, but I recognize that the term is subject to some ambiguity. But in this sense, need is a feeling of anticipated relief from discomfort or pain or distress. So, for example, if I say I need an aspirin, it's because I've got a headache and I feel that taking an aspirin is going to make that headache go away. If someone is anxious and they want to engage in a particular way, or they need to engage in a particular way that will reduce that, we're talking about need. So wants and needs are two sides of a coin, but they're also very closely related to each other. Anyone who's got small children or seen a small child who is passing someone selling ice cream will know very well how want can very quickly turn into need. And when for some strange reason, mostly to do with the cruelty of the parent, the ice cream is not available to the child experiences very severe distress. And it always interests me when you see a child who can't get something they want and need. You can't tell whether they've been told they can't have an ice cream or whether their mother's just died. It could be exactly the same. As far as the child's concerned, it's a terrible experience. So want and need get very closely tied into each other. And it happens with smoking. So, for example, the level of enjoyment that smokers get from the cigarette is very closely tied to the level of craving, the sort of the feeling of urge to smoke, the loss when the cigarette isn't available. And then impulses and inhibitions, these are the very low-level action schema, the things that sort of drive our moment-to-moment behavior. And the balance between these is what ultimately determines what we do. And so, for example, if we think of someone as being impulsive, very often what we're talking about is a low level of ability to inhibit an ongoing impulse as a result of our top-down behaviors. An urge to smoke is a very nice example of that. With a lot of people, when they experience an urge to smoke, it's not, I have an urge to smoke because it's just an urge to smoke. And I won't go into the details, but we have quite a good understanding of the way that nicotine acts on certain parts of the brain to do that. And then finally, we have our responses, which I won't go into. So, okay, I'm going to just very briefly run through the key propositions, and then hopefully we can get to some discussion. So, first key proposition is that every moment our actions are generated by the strongest of competing impulses and inhibitions. None of these, I think, are controversial. As I say, this is a bird's eye view, trying to encapsulate things that we already know from our theories. These action schemas are generated by learnt and unlearnt stimulus impulse associations. Unlearned ones, we call them instincts. Learnt ones, we call them habits. But they're also generated by the next level up, by motives. At every moment, wants and needs, motives, are generated by our internal environment, but they're also generated by what we think is good and bad. Looking at evaluations, which is where so much of our lives are led, our cognitive lives, our beliefs and so on, these are generated by analysis, working things out, thinking about the future, thinking, if you're a smoker, I'm going to get lung cancer, that's a bad thing. This is the level of the costs and benefits analysis, the choices that we make. And then when it comes to the plans, again, I can't go into the details, but we formulate intentions and plans when we think something's a good idea, but it's not something that we can do now, right in this very minute, so we store it for the future. And this system is dynamic, because we exist in time. And so we can understand the process in terms of the operation of this system over successive periods of time. And what we're interested in is how we go from one moment to the next moment with that system operating. And we talk about traits, personality traits, and intelligence and things like that. These are the systems that govern the transition from one part to the next. And there's lots of ways in which these things can change. Communication. Someone tells us something, now we know it, and then that changes us. Perception. We experience something for ourselves. Inference and analysis. Associative learning. Just simply the associations we build up between our actions and our experiences, for example. Habituation. Things that were wonderful and lovely and that we enjoy, we get bored with. But we also sensitize, and this is very true for stimulant drugs, for example, that the first time you experience a drug like cocaine or amphetamine or even nicotine, you get a certain effect, and then the body doesn't habituate to that. It's completely the opposite of what people think with addiction. It doesn't habituate, it actually sensitizes so that the next time you take it, you get a stronger reaction. An imitation, and even maturation. When you get to my age, certain things are different from what they were when you're in your 20s. And I've talked about identity, so I won't go into the details here, but just to make the point that identity is a major, with humans, major part of the cognitions, of the values, of the motives, of the plans that underlie this system. And then we've finished with some examples. So what this bird's eye view or satellite view is aimed to do is to help you to decide what kind of intervention you might focus on for a particular problem that you want to achieve. One example might be forming better plans. And we have all this work on if-then rules or implementation intentions, which have had some success. A lot of what we do involves providing people with information, which changes their cost-benefit analysis. So that's focusing on evaluations. The sort of work that I do, a lot of my work is actually with pharmacological interventions. There's a drug called varenicline, but we also know about nicotine patches. There's drugs like cytosine and nortriptyline. These operate really at the animalistic part of the brain, the low-level part of the brain. They're appetite suppressants for nicotine hunger. We've got habit training, things that generate stimulus-impulse associations. And one of the ones that I'm particularly interested in, will be obvious, is identity change. And why am I interested in it? Because this has the capacity, with identity change, to operate at more than one level. Identity change potentially can change at least 3 of the levels that we're talking about within this theory. And the theory itself is described in more detail in this book, Theory of Addiction. And I think Susan's mentioned the behavior change wheel, which talks about how this is set within the context of behavior change. That's it. Thank you very much.